Okay, so now let's start going over different types of invertebrates. So I'm going to try to put them in order or sort of rank them with their evolutionary complexity. Putting them in the order in which they evolved is tricky because there's new ones evolving simultaneously. So we do generally know like which ones evolve first, but then it gets to the point in evolution where some of the more modern invertebrates are sort of evolving simultaneously with older invertebrates that are still evolving, and it gets a little tricky. But generally, this is the right order for the order in which they evolved, or could be seen as the order of their complexity. So if we follow this cladogram, here we have sponges. Again, not really considering them a type of animals. We'll get into some more. And then here we have definitely the animal tree coming up, and we'll be going over some of these different invertebrates. And then over here are the vertebrate animals, which we'll save for the next slideshow. Okay, so here we have a pretty cool looking sponge. And so the water will filter through here. And then those cells I talked about earlier will use their flagella to capture little food particles. So, are they the first animals? I don't know. And partly because they're only made of cells doing different jobs, there's no real tissues. So again, to me it seems like a really advanced colony of protozoans. The one reason why I've heard that it's considered animals because if we did destroy the sponge, that it could kind of regrow and make a new one, and somehow that indicates there's some shared genetics or something there, but I'm in the group that thinks they are not animals. And so they're filter feeders. They're the only animal with asymmetry, which also adds to, like, are they really an animal? And they make little glass-like structures called spicules that help hold them together, which we could kind of consider their skeletons, and that's what this little shape right here represents. So here we have the ones that with the flagella for capturing food. I think I got another picture. Yeah. So here we have cells that open up and let the water in. We've got the cells with the flagella for capturing the food. And then, like I said, the ones that are like amoebas are even called amoebocytes, and they move the nutrients around. And so all these cells function independently, or we would say they have tissues, but they don't. So again, I know I keep repeating myself, but this is why, because they all function independently of each other. To me, it seems like a really advanced protist colony. Okay, now we're getting into real animals here, and it might seem like coral over here is asymmetrical, but it's actually not, because if we look close, which I'll show you, each coral is a round or radial organism. So it's actually the structures that they build are asymmetrical, but when we look close, the animals that are building those structures do have a radial symmetry. Kind of like the jellies here, this is a radial or round symmetry. And this is just a crazy outbreak of jellies. I think this is in Japan. They've had some really bad jelly outbreaks. I think partly it has to do with pollution and some other things that the jellies like. And they are overpopulating and causing a lot of problems, actually. And pretty sure it's pollution related, maybe even tied into global warming a little bit. Maybe they like the temperature. And here we see a diver in here just to show you how many there are. It's kind of crazy. Alright, so a lot of firsts here, which ties into another reason why I consider these probably the first real animals. They have the first radial symmetry, so they actually have a shape. They're the first with tissues, but they don't have any organs yet. They do have the first nervous system, another reason why I consider them the first animals. And there's no central point, like a brain or even like a simple brain, which we'll go over that term here in a second. But it's kind of spread out evenly, and the term for that is a nerve net. So there's no like central point like we have with our brain. They're called cnidarians because they have a cnidocyte, which are stinging cells at the end of their tentacles for attacking their prey or defending themselves. And they go through two life stages. Polyps, which are like this shape, are kind of stuck on rocks and coral and are immobile. And then medusas, which is this shape, are mobile. And so some spend most of their life as the polyp, like a sea anemone spends most of its life as a polyp, whereas jellies spend most of their life in the medusa phase. And so usually I ask, okay, why do you think they're called medusa? And some people know that in Greek mythology there's this monster that's named Medusa, and she has snakes for hair. So probably when the Greeks saw jellies in the water, they might have thought they were like Medusa's head and made that name. So one of the things I mentioned was if we look at letter B, they have no organs, and the next organisms to evolve will have organs, and it has to do with what we're seeing right here, which is the fact that their mouth and their anus are the same thing. So where the food goes in is also where the food comes out. And so the next animals to evolve will create separate openings and develop the first organ for digestion, which probably was a big advantage because of food getting caught. So if some food falls into the sea anemone and it's already full of food, now it's got food coming in and maybe it wants to get food out and it's kind of got a traffic jam or whatever in its mouth/anus area. So we'll see what the next group of animals, they got rid of that combination and separated the two. This is a weird chart of talking about the development of a certain species of jelly. So this is the larva, which make up part of plankton. And it comes down and it lands on the ground or rocks or whatever. And then it starts to develop. And now it's starting to go into its polyp phase. As we get into like 8, it's fully in its polyp phase. But then in 9, we start to see these layers forming. Now we're starting to see the layers separate. And then it's pretty weird. Then the layers kind of split. And each layer becomes its own jelly and goes off and lives its own life. So jellies definitely develop in a weird way. Here's just a really cool picture of a jelly. This is just one of the bigger species, just really big. They've even tagged it, it looks like, for tracking it and seeing where it's going. This picture is talking about the nerve net. So if we look, we can kind of see these little lines throughout. It's kind of hard to tell, and there's no central place. There's no like brain here, brain there. It's all evenly distributed like a net, like a fishing net. And so simple nervous system, but definitely a nervous system, and that's something that sponges do not have. Again, they're called cnidarians because they have cnidocytes, which are the stingers. So that's kind of a cool picture. The stinger looks like an arrowhead. All right, some of the diversity of cnidarians. These are hydras, and we actually earlier in the year we looked at when we first used the microscopes. We looked at some preserved hydra. They were kind of pinkish purple, and you had to draw them, and you had to label the tentacles. So that might ring a bell. And they can actually fertilize themselves. They're what we call a hermaphrodite. So they have both male and female reproductive parts. And the sperm can come out and fertilize the ovary, and they can actually make a new one like right off themselves, which is pretty weird, and that's what we're seeing over here. Okay, this is coral. So I picked this coral on purpose because it's really big, so you can really see how radial and round it is. So here you can see that round shape here, here, okay? And this is why they're considered radial and not asymmetrical. So again, the structures they make are asymmetrical, but the coral animal itself is radial or round. And very similar to a sea anemone, except this stuff down here, which builds those structures they live in. Okay, then we got some cool looking jellies here. So they're pretty cool. Some cool looking anemones, and this one's got a little clownfish friend. Okay, here's a little model of a hydra, and showing that they take the food in. And normally we would have done a protist lab by now, and we do find little micro animals. And some people actually find, if you look down here, it's called a daphnia. People do find daphnias in the lab that we do, and this little drawing is showing that little hydras will actually capture and eat daphnia, which are small little crustaceans. Here's another animal hiding amongst the tentacles to stay safe, and it's kind of a cool little shrimp here, and it's kind of transparent. It has sort of like a see-through exoskeleton, which is pretty cool. So you guys know some animals will hide in there to get protection from predators, and they tend to eat little parasites off of the sea anemone to keep it clean, so they both benefit, and you guys should remember that term for that is mutualism. Alright, then eventually jellies evolved into flatworms. So it's pretty easy to imagine over a lot of time living things were dying and a lot of nutrients were floating to the bottom of the ocean. And there was a lot of nutrients to gather from that area. But a jelly with all those tentacles and stuff probably couldn't gather them very well. So if we particularly look at this purple white one, it's pretty easy to imagine that some of the jellies kind of flattened out and started trying to exploit more the bottom of the water and get those nutrients. And that's probably what led to the evolution of flatworms. And so flatworms are really cool looking, really colorful. Obviously just taken in these pictures. Here's another really colorful one. I think this one might be poisonous. The black and yellow tends to be a evolutionary color, like as a warning of toxins. And what we see here is a lot of another more big firsts here. So they have the first bilateral symmetry, so they're not radial. They actually have a left and right side. And they have the first organ, which I was just talking about. Now the mouth and the anus have been separated and are on both ends and not together like they were in the Cnidarians. And we have the first digestive organ in evolution. They have the first ganglion, so they don't have the nerve net. They have something a little more advanced, but it's still not a brain. It might be considered like a pre-brain. It's basically like a cluster of nerves where the information is kind of going through there, but not advanced enough to be considered a brain yet. So it's called a ganglion. And some of them are pretty nasty parasites like tapeworms. So I'm going to actually show some tapeworm pictures. So if you think you're going to be grossed out by tapeworms, there's your warning. Here we go. Here is a tapeworm, and they can get really long, and they hook in with these parts here into the intestines of larger animals. You may have a dog or something that once had worms and had to have them removed or something, and they can be, a big problem. Here we go with some more tapeworm pictures. This is a tapeworm that was removed from a fish. So they just wind through the intestines, and intestines can be really long. And this tapeworm that came out of a fish. And the next picture is going to show a tapeworm being removed from a human. So heads up. Okay, so I'm assuming as every year in every class when I show this picture, there are a lot of groans and reactions happening. This is a tapeworm being removed from this man's mouth. It appears to be 4 or 5 feet long. And they have to remove them from the mouth because if you try to force them out, they can break. And then when they break, they can release eggs into the body. And now there's more tapeworm eggs inside that person's body. So from what I've heard, the person actually has to starve themselves because the tapeworm actually relies on the human to eat and give it food. And so if the human starts kind of starving himself, in this case himself, that the tapeworm starts to starve as well. So they have to lure the tapeworm out the mouth, and I think they put food outside the mouth, and the tapeworm will start to come out on its own. And then I guess this doctor is trying to very carefully remove the tapeworm from this guy's body through his mouth, and does not look like they're done. So looks like it's still coming. So be careful. It comes from eating food that has their eggs on it. So just be very careful with how you take care of your food. All right, we're going to stop on roundworms because that one got kind of long, so we'll restart there. Hopefully you're not getting too grossed out. I will definitely show you more cool, beautiful animals as we go.